Alright, I've talked plenty about the Purple Dragon on here, and it's about damn time that I got to the Orange Marsupial. Crash Bandicoot is a game that must have felt, back in 1996, like going back to the drawing board. It came out the very same month that Mario made his leap into the third dimension with Super Mario 64, a fully 3D game that both reinvented the series and essentially established the modern free-roaming 3D platformer almost single-handedly. Crash, on the other hand, works off of the original Super Mario Bros. Foundation. It doesn't even attempt to reinvent anything. Now, the lion's share of the game is not 2D or 2.5D, it's 3D, but on a track. I like to call this a hallway platformer. I don't know if others use that term or not. You generally can move Crash in every direction, but the environment you're transversing with him has strict barriers. You're constrained to a quite narrow path compared to something like Super Mario 64. In a way, it's hard for me to believe that a game like this was so successful during a time when the gaming industry was charging forward at such an unprecedented rate. Crash Bandicoot may have even been considered a risky project for a development studio to sink money into at the time, but its smashing success was proof that there was still plenty of room for a game like this on the market. There's beauty in simplicity. It's not worse than a fully 3D, fully free-roaming platformer. It's just different. No matter how far technology goes, this concept is timeless, and it will always be really, really fun to play so long as it's executed well. The control scheme is incredibly simplistic. The D-pad moves, the X button jumps, and the circle button executes a spin attack. That is it. It's a more limited control scheme than the vast majority of Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis games had, never mind the PlayStation or Nintendo 64. But while simple, the controls are tight, and that's what counts. The core of the platforming and the point A to point B goal of the game aren't the only mechanics borrowed from Super Mario Bros. The boxes you smash are pretty much stand-ins for Mario's blocks, and the Wumpa fruit given extra life after collecting 100, just like Mario's coins. Occasionally, you can find an Aku Aku crate, which gives Crash a floating mask buddy that functions as a hit point, this game's equivalent to the Super Mario mushroom. Finding a second strengthens Aku Aku into 2 hit points, and a third grants invincibility for a limited time, much like Mario's star power-up. This invincibility does have some limitations, though. Aku Aku can actually be distracting at times when precise platforming is required, so he takes some getting used to. A hit point does you no good if you're falling to your doom. And unlike Super Mario Bros., Crash Bandicoot does not impose a time limit. Hell yeah, I hate time limits in platformers. Anyway, along with this incredibly simple control scheme comes very challenging gameplay. It's a combination that's like peanut butter and chocolate, and it's this combination that makes the game one of the purest tests of platforming skill in all of gaming. It's just you and your reflexes. And maybe your depth perception as well. Mine isn't very good, and if yours is worse, then some of the levels will drive you up a wall. This game is hard, almost from the very beginning. Each level is basically a deadly obstacle course. The enemies, which are not reactive in any way, instead always exhibiting the same deterministic patterns, will even walk straight into pits on their own accord. Static enemies could be seen as a negative, especially for a game released in 1996, but it was designed from the ground up for static enemies. They're just parts of the greater obstacle course, and another example of how this game was not in any way trying to reinvent the wheel. The only enemies that are somewhat reactive are these shield holders, who are pretty damn annoying. It took me a long while to really get the hang of tackling them. Enemy weaknesses can be inconsistent. The only real way to figure out what type of attack to perform, either the spin or just jumping on their head, is trial and error. Some can't be attacked at all and simply must be avoided, like a standard hazard. Not much of the game is trial and error, though. At least, not in theory. For the most part, you could speed through these levels on first go-around if your reflexes are up for the challenge. In practice, though, that's probably not going to happen. It's a difficult enough game that some amount of level memorization is going to be necessary for most players. So yes, the game is very challenging, and that challenge can be uneven. The levels are organized into 3 different islands, and Island 2, for me, was much harder than the early parts of the third. Nevertheless, the challenge is almost always fair. Yes, almost. Hit detection is incredibly strict. I had a number of deaths where it really didn't feel like anything collided with me at all. Objects and enemies cause death seemingly before collision. With enemies specifically, it can take a while to get attack timing down pat, despite the simplicity of the control scheme itself. Some grace is extended to the player by there being no fall damage present at all. This came in handy for me specifically during all these segments with the spinning log platforms. I suck at these. I love this game, but I don't think any other game in existence pisses me off as badly as this one does. But that makes sense, because if I didn't love it, I could just quit. The last time I broke a game controller out of anger, I was a child. I am no longer a child, and haven't been one for some time. I don't plan on ever smashing a controller again, but this game really tested my resolve. There are no analog controls in Crash Bandicoot. It was made before the DualShock controller was made. It's always difficult for me to believe that the PS1 launched with this thing, because by the time I got mine, the DualShock was around. And therefore, if you use a DualShock controller with it, the sticks will not function. That sucks, on the one hand. For any games that are even somewhat 3D, I think most of us are used to joysticks, not D-pads. Nevertheless, this is a game designed from the ground up to be played without analog, so the D-pad will serve you fine so long as you get good. I found myself using a lot of short taps of the up, down, left, and right buttons individually, rather than smashing two at a time for a diagonal movement. Deliberate, precise movements, as opposed to large, sweeping movements. One recurring part of the game that an analog stick would be very useful for are the rolling boulder levels. To do these levels, you must have the down button depressed at all times, and not let it off as you drift your thumb back and forth across the left and right buttons. Simply being able to turn a joystick along the bottom would be much more efficient. So, more on the variations of the typical level template, and more on the typical hallways Crash is platforming through. The occasional boulder levels are one way the game provides variety. The first of which is only the 4th level in the game, and it's a genuine challenge. I alluded earlier to the fact that this game takes the training wheels off pretty early, and to me, this is the moment that shit gets serious. I've always loved Crash's forward-running animation, the way he swings those big-ass arms around like a dancer in a hardcore pit. The hog levels provide another change of pace. They're this game's version of the classic auto-scrolling level, because you have no control over the hog beyond steering left and right and jumping. It's on the move at all times and changes speed periodically. Many people hate these, but I don't mind them. The standard levels, despite being very linear and featuring no real exploration beyond the occasional secret area or diverging path, which are nearly always brief, often see Crash moving forward, backward, changing direction, going side to side, often multiple times over. You get the idea. Others are simply side-scrollers. The repetition inherent to most video games is disguised really well here. That's good. When you're playing a level with a lot of change in direction, it can feel like those things we'd find in coloring books or word search books or whatever back when we were kids, where you'd try to drag your pencil around a maze without lifting it up or touching any of the lines. It's great. Back to the lack of analog control, I often find myself wanting to use the right stick to reposition the camera during levels like this, but alas, that is not an option. And unfortunately, the PS1 era old school method of using the shoulder buttons is not an option in this game either. When you're going forward, the spin attack can often fire enemies into the foreground and hit other enemies and/or boxes. It's hilarious. The sound effects fit so perfect. All of the sound effects in this game are great, actually. I've always loved that checkpoint box animation, and I often stop to watch it go. Oh, and the theme song never fails to get me moving around in my seat. The game has a great OST all around. The chill music of the Rolling Stones level is just so chill. And the music in Heavy Machinery? Funky. One big thing I haven't mentioned thus far is the bonus levels. Not every level has one, but those that do can be accessed by collecting 3 bonus level tokens found in specific boxes scattered throughout the level. These are side-scrollers, give you the chance to rack up some extra lives, and give you the opportunity to save your game at the end. Yes, you heard that correctly. That is the only method for saving progress in Crash Bandicoot. Well, other than earning gems anyway, which is even more difficult, but we'll get into that later. The easiest, most straightforward, primary way to save your progress, in case you want to quit and come back to the game later, is to find 3 tokens scattered throughout a level, which aren't present in every level. Enter a bonus round, make it to the end of said bonus round, and then you are given the opportunity to save. That is atrocious. By the midway point of the game, these get pretty damn difficult and become a rare part of the game that is genuinely trial and error at times. And what happens if you die in one thanks to this trial and error bullshit? Well, you don't lose a life, so that's nice, but you are booted out of the bonus stage, and the only way to get back to it is to exit the level, re-enter, start it over, and collect the tokens once again. What if you game over as you're trying to get back into the bonus level? Well then, fuck you. Tough shit. You're going back to the last point that you were able to save. To be clear, I'm fine with gameplay being difficult. I'm even fine with being sent back a few levels if I lose all of my lives. After all, extra lives can be racked up pretty easily with either the Wumpa Fruit or the extra life boxes, which are doled out pretty generously. That said, it's even easier to burn lives. But anyway, what I'm not fine with is needing to satisfy a list of conditions just to save my fucking progress. Does it ruin the game? No, of course not. Is it a major black mark? Undeniably. The funniest part of this jacked up, ass-backward save system to me is that it saves your progress at the beginning of the following level, so you can technically advance a level without actually completing the level. I mentioned before that this game is rage-inducing. It's also rather stressful, and the save system is a huge reason why. Throughout my playthrough, when I had just advanced past a very difficult level while running low on lives, I always stressed about whether or not I'd be able to save before they ran out and I was sent back to have to deal with that level that gave me trouble all over again. At times, exiting and re-entering levels to hopefully get to the bonus stage again, to hopefully make it to the end where the damn save point is, made the game more stressful than fun. At least, most of the bonus stages have save points. The Embryo bonus stages, he's one of the game's bosses, are just an opportunity to rack up extra lives, with no save opportunity. The Cortex bonus stages, he's the final boss, where you also earn keys, we'll talk about those in depth later, are save opportunities, as are the Tawna bonus stages, which are by far the most common. Speaking of Tawna, let's address her, and some other aspects of the game's story and the characterization of its characters. Tawna could potentially be seen as distasteful, but in order to understand her character, we first must understand the main character. This may seem like a kid's game, but in 1996, it wasn't. Not really. Conceptually, it's pretty clearly a parody of the ubiquitous at the time mascot platformer. Crash Bandicoot? What the hell is a bandicoot? Well, I'm sure our Australian friends know, but most of us had no idea. Choosing an animal almost no one has ever heard of to be your next big mascot character was intentionally ridiculous, and so is Crash's characterization. Crash doesn't strive to be a wholesome older brother insert for young kids like Mario did, nor does he strive to be the casual, cool, cocky master of his craft admired figure for older kids like Sonic did. Instead, Naughty Dog and Sony targeted adult gamers by giving them a character to laugh at when they developed and marketed Crash. He was frantic and irreverent. He symbolized uncontrollable chaos and even self-destruction. He made this face before jumping on the back of a feral hog. Sonic was carefree in the sense that he was gonna save the day and then say, yeah, whatever. Crash was carefree in a totally different manner. He was self-aware. His death animations were intentionally silly and arguably an early form of meta-humor. Sony even ran an aggressive ad campaign that depicted a guy in a mascot-style costume as Crash, outside of Nintendo headquarters, antagonizing Mario with a megaphone.
Hey, plumber boy, mustache man, your worst nightmare has arrived.
PlayStation wasn't the first console marketed at demographics beyond tiny children, but it was the first console that saw its developers making a full-court press for the adult demographic, rather than just the teenage demographic.
I'm gonna come down there and kick your ass.
The fact that it doubled as an audio CD player may not seem like a big deal today, but it was at the time, and these commercials screamed, "Nintendo is for babies, PlayStation is for you." Was Crash the first irony-pilled video game character? Yeah, I think so. Shows like Beavis and Butthead and Ren and Stimpy were all the rage at the time, and Crash, at this stage in his life, fits right into that mold. All this goofiness is juxtaposed with an opening cutscene that, despite being a cartoon, is actually pretty dark in tone, with a hint of self-awareness and smart-ass attitude. If you know the opening cutscene exists, you have to remain idle for a certain amount of time on the title screen in order to prompt it to play. In fact, a lot of the levels are both visually and tonally dark as well. And again, gameplay is genuinely very hard. And while beating a game back in 1996 was generally still a testament to a player's skill level and a true badge of honor, as opposed to today, where all beating a game means is that you had an extra 35 hours to spare to trudge your way through an extremely long interactive movie. The era of all games being hard as nails, as they were in the NES era, was definitely over. Kids' games in this era were not as difficult as Crash Bandicoot is. So yeah, with all this in mind, it's pretty clear that this is a game that was made for and marketed to adults first and foremost, even if some kids did obviously play it. And it's easy to forget all of that now, since starting with Crash 2, Naughty Dog and Sony began to transition Crash into being a typical mass-market character, and away from being a provocateur. That brings us back to Tawna. Now that we're aware that Crash is a parody of the popular video game mascot, it's pretty clear that this blonde, big-breasted, Pamela Anderson-inspired bimbo character is an over-the-top parody of the typical useless, airheaded damsel in distress. Now that Crash has become more akin to a regular gaming mascot rather than a parody of one, following the release of Crash 2 and the other sequels and spin-offs that followed, it's easy to see why Tawna was quickly pushed to the wayside. And that brings us back to the bonus rounds, the overwhelming majority of which being accessed by collecting Tawna tokens and featuring Tawna at the end where the save point is. This is the damsel we're supposed to be rescuing. I thought Cortex nabbed her. Why is she right there? Get her, Crash! No time to lose! Oh well, I can't make sense of everything. Aside from the god-awful save system, the other big negative this game has is the bosses. Much like the bulk of the enemies in the game, they are not reactive at all. As a result, I personally found myself overcomplicating them, and tricking myself into thinking that they're way harder than they are because I expect bosses in a game to be reactive, even if most enemies are not. The first two bosses, Papu Papu and Ripperoo, are ridiculously easy, with the former being particularly infamous for that. For some reason, he's not infamous for showing off his ass crack. Nevertheless, I burned a shit ton of lives on them, especially the latter. It wasn't until Koala Kong, the third boss, that I got the system down pat. I beat him on my first try. Then there's Pinstripe. He requires patience. And that's it. Wait for the opportunity to strike, don't strike before getting the opportunity, and once the opportunity arises, don't hesitate. It's very boring, and unfortunate because I love the idea behind this character. A gangster marsupial that fires a machine gun like Tony Montana? Hell yeah, that's cool. As is the visual you get after defeating him. I like the idea behind most of the bosses, actually. Most seem to be Cortex experiments like Crash, another dark aspect of the opening cutscene being that Cortex is implied to be doing bizarre animal experiments habitually, and they all have cool designs. It's a shame that they're all either stupidly easy or parlor tricks. The strategy for N. Brio is not intuitive at all, but once you know it, it's a cinch. I was kinda relieved when Cortex, the final boss, was a pushover as well, because the lab, the last of the big levels that drove me up a wall on my initial playthrough, features the game's only bonus round that saves before the level it's on rather than after, but we'll talk about my frustrations with this level later. Anyway, yeah, I have a tendency to either overcomplicate these boss fights or to try and rush, because they're simply not very enjoyable for the most part. But objectively speaking, they're easy, in stark contrast to the rest of the game, and boss levels always start you with a powered up Aku Aku for 2 free hit points. To sum up all of that rant into one sentence, the bosses in this game feel like an afterthought, especially compared to all of the care and attention that was obviously put into the non-boss levels. So if you're able to get all the way through the game and to the end credits, which is a great challenge in and of itself, what is there to do next? This is a PS1 platformer, so of course, go for 100% completion. What does that entail in this game? Collecting all of the gems. There's 1 to earn on every level. How do you earn them? By smashing every box on said level, all on 1 life. All on 1 life. All of the boxes on 1 life? That may sound ridiculously hard. And it is. The only one I managed to do on my initial playthrough of the game was the first rolling boulder level that I talked about earlier. Everything else I had to go back for after beating the game the basic way. I actually liked the challenge of trying to get the gems more though. Seriously, simply because it allowed me to not have the stress of knowing that I may be sent back multiple levels if I game over, as I had already successfully saved at the lab, the last big level, by that point, and thus unlocked all of the gem levels. It's also fun to see how some of the easy levels are given an extra layer of challenge, like this row of boxes on the very first level, Insanity Beach. The level in general is very easy, but this part right here is pretty tricky. Unless you cheese it with the invincibility mask like I just did. But just because I enjoyed the gem hunting challenge doesn't mean I don't have a few complaints. Many of these levels feature hidden boxes, so even if you get through the whole thing on 1 life thinking that you've got every box, you may have the rug pulled out from under you at the end when you realized you missed some that you didn't know existed. In a way, I liked this extra challenge, but some are simply way too cryptic to figure out, and I'd have never been able to do so without internet resources. Further, it's a pain in the ass to die after a checkpoint when you're gem hunting, because then you have to exit the level, go back to the map, and then re-enter it again. Having a reset button on the pause menu would have been nice, to cut down on the amount of time spent on loading screens, as opposed to having to load the map and then load the level again. If you decide to go for 100% in this game, be prepared to do this many, many times over. It was always a bit demoralizing for me to go through this process before I had adequately practiced a level, exiting and re-entering knowing full well I'm not going to get the gem on this run, but always saying, well, maybe I'll fluke it, gotta give it a try. The hog levels, which I said before that I didn't mind, and on the initial playthrough, I didn't, are levels that I feel don't translate very well to the gem challenge. In fact, earning these gems was actually kinda miserable. It's very difficult because missing a box when you're riding an animal that you don't control the speed of and can't stop is going to happen frequently. Again, if you attempt to 100% this game, get used to seeing Crash make that face when he mounts the hog. Again, and again, and again. Come to think of it, the Crash visual upon earning a gem is even more disturbing. It's the equivalent of seeing a really bad selfie on someone's social media profile and thinking, they took that and decided to post it instead of retake it? Most levels award a clear gem, like this one here. Others award a colored gem, which are then activated in other levels to be used as platforms to get to hidden boxes. In other words, there are some levels that you need to complete first in order to make other levels completable later. This is another part where a guide comes in handy. I can imagine the frustration of trying to complete a level without realizing that I needed a colored gem in order to do it, and not knowing which level to get the colored gem in. This is how many of the early levels are made difficult though. A level that would otherwise be on the easier side to do a perfect run in, first require a perfect run on a later, much harder level. Then there's the shortcut that gets opened in Castle Machinery by the green gem. If you want to get a boatload of extra lives and skip the level entirely, that's an option, if you have the green gem. You obviously won't get any boxes this way, though. Attempting to beat Crash Bandicoot 100% is not for the faint of heart, but it is very rewarding. On my initial playthrough, the Lost City was a level that gave me a ton of trouble. Revisiting it later for the gem, I was shocked to see myself earn it on one of my first tries. Talk to some veteran players and you'll no doubt hear that if there's one level in this game that'll put hair on your chest, it's Slippery Climb. For a lot of people who picked this game up back in the day, this level marked the end of the line. On my initial playthrough, it felt impossible. On my gem run, it still felt impossible, but by God I did it. This side-scroller is a fantastic level. Hard as frozen walnuts, but entirely fair. Some more of my favorite levels include Road to Nowhere early on, and much later, the High Road. Each of these levels has the same concept, with the later one obviously being a much more difficult version of the concept. They each go in totally linear paths, point A to point B in a completely straight line, but the challenge is so good, and it's created in so many different ways. Weak boards that collapse after a couple of seconds, weak boards that collapse immediately, enemies, slightly sloped sections with ice physics. It's great. They're also the primary areas that make use of the bouncy platform mechanic. In the form of these tortoises you have to flip over. Press X as you hit them for an extra super jump. So cool. Check out this bullshit you have to do at the end of Road to Nowhere if you're going for the gem and need all of the boxes, though. What a crock. The High Road includes similar horse crap at the very beginning, and I actually discovered it myself without the help of a guide on one of my first tries. Then on one of my next tries, I neglected to go back for the boxes because I didn't think about it. I remembered not long after, but thought to myself, oh, there's no way I'll make it through all of this on this try anyway. Welp, I did in fact fluke it on that try, and of course did not get the gem because I missed the secret area on that go. Great! Overall though, these are both fantastic levels. The one that changes the most dramatically if you're going for the gem is probably Cortex Power. This one is a maze, and while simply getting to the end isn't difficult, at least in terms of navigation, getting every box requires zigging and zagging all over the place. I wanted to highlight this as a good way to create Hidden Box Challenge, as opposed to the cheaper methods some of the other levels go for. My least favorite level is the lab. Seriously, fuck this place. Slippery Climb and the High Road are both really difficult, but the challenge is entirely fair. There's so much bullshit in this one. It's all about timing, not reflexes, and about counting seconds to figure out these layered patterns. I didn't like it. One thing that makes it infinitely easier though is to go to a different level and grab a couple of Aku Aku masks, because there are none on this level, but they do carry over. Then all you have to do is avoid falling in the pits, and can afford to take a couple of hits from the enemies, electricity, and whatnot. Without exploiting this, I don't think I'd have ever gotten the gem on this level. Even so, the Aku Aku mask doesn't help much with this absolute manure at the end, which I swear is mostly luck. I have no idea how to account for every variable when counting the seconds. Just an infuriating level from top to bottom, even once I had played it umpteen times and knew what was coming next. I mentioned earlier that you can skip straight from the very beginning to the very end of Castle Machinery with the green gem. But if you're trying to get every box to earn the gem that Castle Machinery awards, it's going to be a lot more difficult. This particular row of boxes in Castle Machinery was, without a doubt, among the most hellish things that I had to do to complete this game 100%. Probably directly next to the Cortex bonus rounds in Jaws of Darkness, necessary for earning one of the game's keys. Yeah, we've barely touched on those, but we're going to now. Thankfully, you don't need every one of these Cortex tokens on one life, but you do need to, once you've collected the tokens, make it through this frustrating bullshit! I can't tell you what a letdown it is to fail here, exit the level, re-enter and collect all of the tokens again, then fail again immediately on this bonus round. It took me so many tries to eventually make it through, and I had to use a YouTube video to know the perfect strategy. Even collecting one of the tokens is kinda difficult. You have to spin this enemy in a particular direction so it doesn't take out the box that contains the token, because if it does, you can't collect the token. Remember what I said about how fun it is to fire enemies into the foreground and tear shit up with them? Yeah, I take that back. Not really. It is still fun, just really annoying in this particular spot. There are 2 keys in the game, and each unlock a bonus level. The first of which is Whole Hog, which is fine, but really just another hog level. The second, the one that's incredibly frustrating to earn, opens up a level called Fumbling in the Dark. Fumbling in the Dark builds upon the mechanics introduced in Lights Out, in which the level is in complete darkness and must be lit up by smashing Aku Aku boxes, who acts as your candle. After a few seconds, he'll go out, and leave you taking leaps of faith in the darkness if you haven't already made it to the next box. So you are forced to constantly be on the move. Anyway, Fumbling in the Dark is basically a more difficult version of Lights Out, kinda like how the High Road is a more difficult version of Road to Nowhere. And it's the last big thing that I want to talk about before I, finally, end this video. I'm extremely impressed by this level. It's possibly my favorite in the whole game. Even if you're not going for 100% completion with all of the gems, and who could blame you if you're not, I'd encourage everyone to get the key and unlock Fumbling in the Dark. It's simple, but man oh man is it ever hard. And totally fair. A pure and unfiltered test of skill. One of the best I've ever found in gaming. Its appeal may be niche, but those of us who love it, love it. One of the more underrated difficulties is the chance of shooting an enemy forward and getting the Aku Aku mask too early, and have to really speed up so that your visibility time doesn't run out before you get the next box. Its only black mark is that it's yet another level with boxes stuck behind the starting point, and they're stupidly hard to get even when you know that they're there. Trial and erroring my way into developing a system with these took me multiple game overs. But again, it's only an issue if you care about the gem. If all you want to do is test your skills to get to the end of the level, then you can ignore them. This was the final level that I earned a gem in. Rather than restarting for every death, I just kept on trucking every time and started over only after reaching the end, to get in as much practice with every section as possible, as you obviously get some checkpoints, until I eventually strung together a perfect run. I think another reason I didn't restart was just simply because I was having too much fun on this level to spend the time loading the map screen and then reloading the level again. Why would I want to interrupt this awesomeness with that? Once you earn every clear gem, some of which of course require colored gems first in order to get, so you need every gem, the clear gems form a massive bridge across the Great Hall. This is the level stuck between the lab and the final boss, Cortex. Before you get the gems, it's just one quick little jump onto Cortex, but once you have the gems, you can skip past Cortex and see an alternate ending cutscene, along with some comedic epilogues for the bosses. That is a weird reward for 100% completion, especially considering that simply defeating Cortex is way easier than collecting every gem. So why do it? Why go to such extremes just for an alternate cutscene? For the bragging rights? No, that's a lousy reason, because if you brag about something like this, guess what?
See, nobody cares.
It's about the journey, not the reward. Completing Crash Bandicoot 100% might just be my proudest achievement in gaming, but that's secondary to the fact that I had a blast while I was doing it. This has been a Leaky Faucet review, and I hope you've enjoyed it. If so, I'd appreciate a thumbs up and for you to subscribe and ring the bell if you'd like to keep up with future videos. Down in the description is a link to buy me a coffee if you'd like to support the channel financially. If not, I want you to know that even by simply clicking on my videos, and especially by hanging around to the end, you're supporting me. So thank you for watching. It means a lot. Have a great rest of your life, and game on.